Hello, everybody. My name is Stephanie Blum, and I am the Associate Director of Annual Giving at Mercy University. And welcome to tonight's virtual finance workshop on navigating credit and debt. So we're excited to partner with My Money Workshop. And Deborah Papson and Ken Luft will be our presenters tonight. But before I turn it over to them, I just want to remind everybody that we are recording. You'll get a copy of the presentation and the recording later on, another day, probably later in the week. Please put any questions in the chat, and we'll be happy to have them answered. If you submitted questions ahead of time, we will get to some of those tonight. They'll be answered throughout the presentation, but some of them about home buying will be answered in our next session in March. So we're looking forward to that. And thank you again for joining us. And Deborah and Ken, I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And want to welcome everybody to today's session and all the Mercy alumni, and really thank everybody for having us, and particularly My Money Workshop and Mercy University. And thank you, Ken, as well, for co-hosting with me. And this is Deborah Papson. I'm speaking, just a way of background. I've been associated with My Money Workshop now a couple of years. I work for Morgan Stanley in a credit risk function, and I've been in the field of finance over 35 years. So I'm happy to do the presentation today. The key issue here is that we keep it interactive. I thank everybody who had sent in a lot of questions in advance. We will do our best to answer most of those questions as we go through the presentation. There may be items or very specific topics that we won't be able to address either by time or knowledge, but we'll be happy to take away those questions. Please include them in your chat, and hopefully we can get back to you through Mercy University so everybody gets the answers they were hoping for. So I'm looking now at the deck on the presentation, and I guess slide 1 tells us basically everything we need to cover today. It's interesting that it's called New Year's resolution because there's a lot of things in managing our credit, managing debt, and improving your credit score that are very similar to other types of New Year's resolutions, like losing weight or going to the gym. Or socializing more. It takes consistency, it takes discipline, it takes focus, but also needs knowledge. If you're going to embark on a weight loss program, you want to understand nutrients and calories and options. Well, managing your credit, your debt, and how to improve your credit score will entail knowledge, discipline, and a continuation over time. So hopefully we'll make it, as I said, interactive and fun. I'm going to move ahead to our agenda, which is on page 5. If I could ask to be that flashed for the audience. So page 5 talks about our agenda today. Broadly speaking, it's our how-to steps to effectively manage credit and debt. Tools, and we're going to talk about tools and resources to empower you and to help you in your journey of financial wellness. One thing I will say is we'll try to address your questions. We'll leave time for Q&A. But I also want to mention that this presentation will be available to you afterwards, and it has a lot of links and a lot of resources. So things that we are going to talk about today, we'll have additional ways to get more information by looking at the links that were included. So when we talk about these, what is these how-to steps of effectively managing credit and debt? And effective management is a key word. I think most people think of credit as a good thing and debt as a bad thing. And the truth is it's neither. Everything has to do with the interplay of those two things. It has to do with knowing what your financial objectives are, understanding what constitute incomes and your forms of income, financial income, whether it be through wages and salaries, whether it be through others like commissions or other types of compensations, but also understanding very well what are your financial, or setting out what are your financial goals. Is there an event that you're planning for? Or do you have a big expense coming up? And deciding, do you deplete your savings, or do you try to use credit card or other types of debt? So again, we're going to help you hopefully navigate those questions and think about debt, credit, and how it also affects your credit score and what that means throughout this presentation. So when I look on
But
page 7, pardon,
you know what, Deborah,
please.
we went over this a little bit yesterday when we were preparing for this. If nobody asks a question, then you're going to listen to Deborah and myself give a lecture for an hour. As enjoyable that it may be for everybody out there, because I'm sure you love sitting in a lecture hall for an hour just listening to someone in front. So if you ask questions, and you could start asking them now, we will try to answer them. If you don't ask questions, we have enough slides and we could talk for an hour without a problem. So this is kind of up to you. And if you don't ask any questions, I just broke my promise because I told them I'd get you to ask some questions. And if you're worried about my background, I used to be a certified as financial planner. I've worked, I still do seminars on Medicare fraud, which I know you don't care about, but I work with other fraud. And basically, we could help. You're here for a reason. And good evening to everyone else out there. Thank you. Ask a question. Okay, I'll turn this back over to Deborah. When you get tired of speaking, if they don't ask questions, let me know. I'll start reading everything.
Well, I appreciate that, Ken. I apologize. I should have properly introduced you in your background, which is very relevant to this conversation.
Okay.
And as you can see, beware, everybody. If you're not asking questions, Ken's going to come out and get you. So, look, Ken is totally right. The benefit is for you. And I certainly want to make sure that I'm covering topics that are of interest or you didn't already cover in prior. So I'm going to skip a bit. And I want to look, basically into managing credit, which starts on page 10. The question, how do we even start? So let's talk about this, right? Let's talk about managing credit. So on page 11, it talks about really, what are the consequences, basically, of what happens when you take on credit, and understanding the concepts, understanding the repercussions. So I think when I said before, look, many people think of debt as a bad thing. Debt is not a bad thing when, again, it is a planned debt that's aligned to needs. So one of the rules of thumb and a golden rule is that you should match your debt to not only purpose, but time horizon. So if you have something that you're buying that's relatively small, and you have the ability to responsibly pay it off in a short period, credit card is a good vehicle to do it. People ask questions about, well, what about credit card versus home loan, which is a longer term type of instrument. Again, rule of thumb is try to match the time horizon of how you plan to pay for it with the way you're going to finance that expense, or that, that expense. Credit card.
Deborah, is that a question we have about
Yes.
debt loan consolidation versus bankruptcy?
Okay, so I'll get to that in a second, but I will address that. Because that's a very pertinent question. I will give the caveat that I am not a specialist in bankruptcy, but I will ask you, Ken, maybe you want to also chime in. It's maybe a subject that you've dealt with a lot with your clients. But when taking on credit card debt, a couple of things of importance. One is be mindful of all the hidden costs. Ensure that you get a credit card without fees. Be aware that the most expensive type of credit that you're going to get is probably through your credit card. Most credit cards have what's called variable rates. That means that when they issue you a credit card, that rate, even if you haven't used a credit card for years, when you use it, they will apply the rate at the moment, and that may be a higher rate than the one you thought you were paying. When you carry a balance, if you carry a balance, which is it's preferred not to, but if you have to carry a balance, you get charged obviously on the average of that balance. So just paying it down at the very end, a portion, you get charged on the average use of that balance. So you may be surprised by that. Late fees will apply, and they're very hard to get out of. And they do impact your credit card score. You're impacted your credit card score when you take out a credit card. So be mindful of how many credit cards you have. be aware of the fact that not paying your credit card will hit your credit card score. And your credit card score, as many of you know, is an important proxy or an important indicator of how well you manage your own finances. And that could affect your ability to take out loans. It could even affect, your ability to rent an apartment, lease a car, any place where they will look at you for your financial capacity. So you need to be mindful of that. I'm going to jump into then the question of debt loan consolidation and bankruptcy. Clearly sometimes it happens. There gets to a point where people find themselves overwhelmed by debt that they've accumulated in their credit card. Something that many people may not realize, that you can go to the issuer. The issuer is usually the bank that gave you the card, and try to work out a payment plan. Interestingly, a few banks, including JP Morgan, now offer payment plans on your already automatically when you buy things using your debit card, which is also interesting because that's one way of paying things off over time and limiting or reducing the cost of it. But when it happens, which happens sometimes, people get over their skis and they have accumulated a significant amount of credit card debt, which keeps on growing exponentially because the interest that you're paying on it just makes that debt grow and grow and grow. So one thing is talk to your issuer, see if there's a way to work out your payment. And one thing that your issuer may talk to you about is debt consolidation, which means they may offer to consolidate your other credit card debt, bring that debt into one place, and then create a payment plan around it. It may be in more favorable terms than the individual credit cards that you have, something to consider. But I will say that when you enter into that debt loan consolidation, there's a cost to it. And usually one of the costs that it has is a significant impact to your credit card score, because the presumption is you have not been able to fulfill your obligations as scheduled. But it is a resource that you can have. What is the difference in doing that versus bankruptcy? And I'll turn to you, Ken, in a bit, because maybe you have more experience, but just generally, if you're going to a loan consolidation, you're looking for a way to restructure your payments to make it so that you can continue to pay those. The presumption is that you're not insolvent, you're not bankrupt, and usually that's a way to avoid getting to that point. Bankruptcy usually is an extreme protective measure where people may declare personal bankruptcy. Again, it should be used as an extreme measure as a way to protect against multiple creditors that may be coming after somebody and putting liens or trying to take any assets that you have as a way of ensuring that they do get repaid. And obviously, it can be a very messy situation. So bankruptcy is one way to go, but it's a very extreme way to go. It's something that you should get guidance from probably a lawyer or financial advisor before going and doing it on your own. It's not a do-it-yourself kind of thing, because there are repercussions. It's very hard to get that off your record over time, and it will make it very difficult for you to have access to credit for a prolonged period of time. Ken, I don't know if there's anything else that you would like to speak on, and you probably come from a point of more knowledge than me.
Well, I appreciate that. And fortunately, I do not have clients who've gone bankrupt. I have clients who considered it. I'm assuming that this is a personal, not a business bankruptcy. Bankruptcy is a last resort, but in this instance, I'm going to refer to two types of debt. Debt you can pay off and debt you can't. If it's going to take you 40 years to pay off the debt, you can't pay it off. What you first need to do, and most people don't do this, you need to list down, and Deborah, I believe it's in the somewhere in here in what we have, you need to list down every place that you owe money to, how much the interest is, what's the interest rate, just a percentage, what is the amount of money you owe, what's the minimum payment. What Deborah talked about going to the source, the bank that you owe money on each card, let's say, that's a great idea. Because basically, part of what you could threaten them with is bankruptcy. Because if you go bankrupt, they get nothing. I don't like to threaten people, but when someone's charging you 30%, I don't care. You know, it's a little different. But the bottom line is, if you think you could pay it off and you have a plan to do it, or you can reduce the interest rate so you can pay it off, do that. A bankruptcy will kind of, well, for about 7 years, it's going to be really difficult to get a house. You may not be able to get a car loan. And if you do, the rates are going to be incredible. So it's not a good idea. If you can't pay it off, you can't. But it's basically on a ratio of what you owe, what the interest rate is, and what your income is. For somebody who's making an income of $150,000, $30,000 in debt's not the worst thing in the world. If you're earning $30,000 a year, $30,000 in debt is catastrophic. But if they can get to the point where they're not going to charge you any more interest, which is negotiable, then it leads you to a way of paying it. Because otherwise, if you have $10,000 in debt, you're paying $3,000 a year in interest. That's incredibly tough to do unless you have a really, really high income. But that's up to you. And as far as consulting a lawyer for bankruptcy, if you do a bankruptcy without a lawyer, it's like going to court without a lawyer. You need a lawyer for this.
Yeah, thank you.
Deborah,
No,
do we have that sheet somewhere? I know somewhere it'll come up at some point where they can list everything. Sorry to do this to you. I know it's there. It could be 10 pages down. I'm sorry.
yeah, I'll have to look. I can't remember exactly. I know there was a mention of it, but it's in your materials. So
Yeah.
anybody who was asking the question, or anybody else who is interested in the topic, you're going to be able to find it in the deck. There's a question here, and does debt loan consolidation get on the record for years as bankruptcy? No. So debt loan consolidation will impact your credit card score. And again, you need to, I'm not an expert. These are things that we'll look into. Maybe we'll take this away and see what other repercussions. But it's a very different endeavor than when you do bankruptcy. Bankruptcy takes years to get off your record. It will definitely impact you. Whereas debt consolidation, most likely where it'll impact you is your credit score, which probably is already impacted because the fact that you've accumulated so much recurring credit card debt that's not paid down already probably is impacting your credit score. So that's very different. I see Alexis is making note that we will be sharing the deck and the recording after the event. So that way we'll be able to, you'll be able to hear all these points, especially Ken's point, and also look through the deck later. So, I know that, many of you probably already have debit cards, credit cards, and have familiarity with it. But still, I think it's worthwhile going through the types of credit cards that are on page 16. So if you don't mind flashing page 16. Because I think here is a key item. We're talking about concerns of when the problem already is there, right? Debt consolidation, bankruptcy, you're already in a pickle, right? But let's talk about what we do to prevent that, right? And it's all about planning. It's all about budgeting, but it's also about, again, what I was saying earlier, matching your needs with the right type of way of financing them. A credit card, I was saying earlier, you shouldn't buy a car with a credit card. Why? Because first of all, it's a big expense. You should be using the highest interest rate that you have access to for making a very large purchase, even though you may get a lot of points or miles, right? But also because the credit cards due every month, and you wouldn't buy a car unless you're planning on paying it in cash. Your idea of buying a car is to pay it over time. That's why getting a car loan that's spread over years makes more sense for the type of purchase you're making. If you're going out to dinner and doing entertainment and doing, customary expenses, yeah, credit card makes sense. In fact, I would say that a good, prudent financial management is to use debit cards. That's one way to keep you in check with how much you have and how much you should be spending, right? Debit cards basically is a nice way to also budget. Because you see immediately the impact it has on your disposable income. It's what you have in the bank. Credit cards can give you a false sense of availability because usually your credit lines are higher than the money that you're keeping in your bank, and that's done on purpose. There's an aspect of encouraging you to consume, right? So using again the different types of way of covering the expenses through the different tools will help you also keep out of harm's way. So on page 16, we have the types of cards. I'm going to go through it very quickly because I think most of you are very familiar, but I just want to align them to the types. When would you use these, right? So prepaid cards, they're finite, right? A prepaid card, you put in $10, you can only spend $10. If you go to the store for $11, it won't roll through. So that is a good thing to use when you really are on a tight budget. It's really a very conservative way of managing your expenses. Store credit cards, beware. Store credit cards loop you in. Typically, they'll offer it to you with no fee, which is a good thing. But typically also they make it way too easy to spend it there at their shops. Store credit cards, by the way, are affiliated with the big banks. So they may say Macy's, but really usually they're linked to Bank of America, to Citibank, etc. So they usually run with the same type of restrictions, payment expectation, and costs as a bank issued. So when you think of store cards, be careful. People tend to accumulate them and think that there's no harm. Every time you get a store card, credit card, it goes, those inquiries run through your credit score. The usage of those cards run through your credit score. Even if you don't use them, they run through your credit score because they're considered available credit. And the presumption by the bank is that you could use it if you wanted to. There's no restriction. So again, don't accumulate store credit cards because they give you 10% off at the cashier. Use them sparingly. Bank cards, what's not here is our debit cards. So I'll add the debit card. Debit cards are my preferred form of payment. There's no fee. You're using your own money. There's no balance due at the end of the month. It's a really, nifty way of also budgeting because you see your expenses every month by you looking at your statement. Some banks, I know JP Morgan offers a very nifty tool, which is they actually at the end of the month show you where you spent your money, categorized by types of expenditure. So if you want to think about how to budget your expenses, a very nice way of doing it is using the bank's tools. And I'm not doing a plug for JP Morgan, but I am a client of them, and I can tell you that having that dashboard at the end of the month can be very educating. So use debit cards where you can. Credit cards, we talked about it, minor expenses or something that you think you can pay with a credit card down to a zero balance by the end of the month, or be very disciplined in paying it in a very short period of time. So maybe you need 3 months, but for certain you can pay it off in 3 months, then it's totally fine. Don't use it for big expenses. Don't use it for things that you don't expect to be able to cover the full balance, either by the end of the month or in a very short period of time. Those interest rates, they accumulate, they compound, and before you know it, every dollar you pay, half of it is probably going to pay interest. And then there's a secured credit card. These are credit cards that are issued, as it says in the box, for people who have limited credit access. And secured simply means that they, for example, they'll take a look at money, your salary or money that you have in your accounts on an average balance. So let's say you have average balance of $1,000 a month. They'll maybe give you a secured credit card for $500 because they assume that on average, you're going to have enough to pay 2 times the value of that card. My view, and this is just a personal view, I'm very conservative about these things. If you really need to get to the point that you need a secured credit card, maybe you have to revisit how you are budgeting your money. Because secured credit cards operate that the minute you can't pay it, they just offset whatever you have in the balance. So, and you have no you can't plan anymore for how it gets paid. It would just be zeroed out at the end of the month. So that's that. I don't know if there's any questions as it relates to this part or anything that we've talked about so far. Please have if not, Ken will be quizzing you guys. Ken, anything else that you wanted to add to what we just covered?
Well, there are about 40 people out there who came on here. And one person who may have a problem to everybody else there, wow, I'm pleased to see 40 people who know exactly what's going on and everything is great. To anybody else then, if you're coming on here to get information, that's terrific. But there are people out there, and you may be out there right now, who think it's their fault that they owe too much money. They're bad people. They didn't know what to do. They're stupid. It doesn't work that way. You're dealing with people who have credit cards whose job it is to hook you in, get you to max out everything, and then figure out how you're going to pay for it. And because they don't really care. As long as money keeps coming in, they're fine. And also, you have people out there who, okay, I have a card. I finally paid it off. And someone sent me, and I have no more credit because of how I handled it. But I went to a store and they said I can buy this $3,000 TV set. I might as well get it. And some more furniture. Why? Because they think your income will give you the right to pay at least minimal payments. They make more money that way. We don't want that to happen. And it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean that you did something wrong. It means that you're dealing with professionals at this. And I do a lot of discussion about fraud. And you'd be surprised how many people smart people are taken in by fraud, basically because you're dealing with a professional, and professional and amateur work with each other. Usually the professional will win. Now, someone said, that's me. Okay, if you have a particular question, I would ask it now, because once we get off, you're going to be able to read the deck. Someone said, I want to build my credit. I have some secure cards. What do you mean zero out with secured credit card?
Yeah. So if you want to build your credit, I assume your credit history and your credit score. First thing is take a look at your credit cards. See how many you have. Anything that you don't need, and you probably, if you're looking to improve your credit score, you probably already should be considering reducing the number of credit cards you have. By zeroing out, it means paying off the balance, but also closing down the credit card. Some people think that if you have zero balance on, 10 cards, it doesn't affect you. The fact that that card is outstanding, even if it has no balance, it does impact your credit score. Again, because the presumption is that you could use it. So easiest way to improve your credit score is eliminate. So pay off and close out, cancel any credit cards that are unnecessary. Try to keep to one or two. It's also good not to have only one credit card. Tech issues happen. You get stuck in a situation where a credit card doesn't work, doesn't run. It's always good to have at least two at least. But more than that, no need. Second way to improve your credit score, think about all your debt. Sometimes people think of debt as, oh, my credit card bill or my lease. Medical bills. If you have medical bills that aren't paid on time, I know it's pesky, I know it's problematic. Believe me, I myself have gone through a situation where I get bill after seeing a doctor. It's like for 10 months, I keep on getting bills for all kinds of numbers that don't make sense. You're better off writing and letting them know that you disagree and dispute a bill that you truly believe should be disputed than ignoring it and saying, I don't owe them that money, and leaving it that way. Because things like that, believe it or not, affect your credit score. Any other payable. Think of anything that you pay on a recurring basis. Subscriptions, all those things count toward your credit score. The biggest one, obviously, is credit card bill. If you have long-term debt, like mortgages, student loan, those have a lesser factor, but obviously you want to pay it on time. And even a day late is considered past due. So make sure that your bills are paid on time. For that, make sure you know all your bills when they're due. Set yourself up for a schedule. Many of the bank tools online, you can set up recurring payments. All those things are going to improve your credit score. And ultimately, rethink about your spending habits. If you find yourself recurringly behind schedule, try to think about, well, what can I do without? Or what can I do without for a while, not permanently for a while? Look, life happens, emergencies happen. Sometimes there's big expenses that were not anticipated, repairs, medical, other. You know, as I was said earlier, the fact that you may fall behind for a short period of time doesn't make you a bad person and doesn't ruin your credit score. But get back on track as soon as you can. Having conversations with your issuers or the bank when you're starting to fall behind and you don't expect to get in a better place is a good tactic. The banks take that positively because it shows intent. Banks prefer you to pay a little bit than pay nothing. In fact, sometimes, banks, actually will look for ways to help you get on a good plan. And those are also ways of improving your credit score when it's been damaged.
I have another question here. Can your FICO score impact your car insurance rate? Theoretically, no, but yeah. I mean,
correct. Theoretically, no, but yes.
Yeah, it can. I wish I could tell you there are ways to cure this. There are things that, how should I put this politely without getting into it, that elected officials can control. And I'm not going to go on either party because it doesn't help for that. But basically, the laws will determine what rates can be charged. And we can't get into that now because it's not going to help. And yeah, it can affect it, but you can keep trying different companies. Also, it's possible sometimes to get a broker. I don't like brokers that much. I like going directly to companies, but try different companies. Look, I have 2 cars. Last year, I live in Brooklyn. Last year, my rates on my insurance went up $1,100. I called the insurance company. I asked why. They said, because you have tickets. I said, I have no tickets. You got into an accident. I haven't gotten into an accident. Oh, this must be a mistake. Then I went and checked and said, no, it's just what they're doing. And I called other companies. They're all doing this. There wasn't a lot of alternatives I had. So basically, I'm stuck with it for now, but I am talking to some representatives to see if they can have a valid reason for increases. May not happen this year or next year, but let's see what happens. There's another one here. Years ago, and by the way, if we didn't answer the questions fully, feel free to ask again. Years ago, I closed out a zero balance store. My credit report indicated that the store canceled it. Is that okay? You don't have control over this. I would check with more than one credit bureau. By the way, unless the laws have changed, you're allowed to get one, each credit bureau of the 3 can give you, or has to give you a report every year for free. Deborah, is that hasn't changed has it?
No, that has not changed. And in fact, some banks, depending on the bank you bank with, and check it out, ask your bank, will actually give you periodic credit scores for free without impacting your credit.
Yeah, and basically, you know what? You could also ask a bank, if you're applying for credit, will this affect anything? If they cancel it out at a zero balance, they know what that is. If they cancel it out with a loss, that's a different situation. So I would just look at the credit report and check it. I will tell you one personal story. Many years, about 8 or 10 years ago, actually more than that, I got a letter from a company, and it said that my card, the amount of my card was being reduced. I was about to throw it out because I don't use the card. But I said, like, just for the heck of it, I called them. I said, what card? Oh, I live in New York, by the way, in Brooklyn. And they said, well, your account in Brooklyn is fine, but the one in Evanston, Illinois is not. It took several months and a lot of letters to get it cleared up. And part of the problem was the credit bureaus didn't want to resolve it, but I sent letters in and it was cleared up. It took months to clear it up. But if you get
Yeah.
a strange letter, don't ignore it. You don't know what's going on. I mean, I found, and by the way, I got a credit bureau report and I found I had over 27 cards outstanding. No balances with all these cards. I'm now down to 3. There are so many times we did something at a store and left it open and
Yeah.
never changed.
Yeah, and that's why I stress the fact that paying it down isn't enough. You have to cancel the card for it not to impact your, precisely what you just said, Ken. There's a chat question here around the purchase of a house and eligibility for a mortgage. This one really you have to talk to your bank because banks have general guidelines in deciding underwriting meaning giving you a loan, a mortgage, which can vary. There are definitely 3 different considerations in providing a mortgage by a bank or the decision to provide a mortgage. And again, I want to be very clear and disclaim, I am not a mortgage specialist. I'm not licensed as a mortgage specialist, but generally speaking, I can tell you there are 3 indications. Your FICO score definitely is important. Your debt to income, right? So how much is your debt versus your income, which is another way of showing that you have the ability to pay your debt. And that usually includes even, long-term debt, such as student loans and so forth. So they look at that. So your ratio with income and debt. And obviously they take a look at your income generally, compared to the size of the mortgage. But the actual answer, somebody posted a question with very, specific information. I could not tell you based on this what a bank would do, but I will say that you should go to the bank where you have that account. So the person was writing, stating that they have money in an account. Go to the bank where you have the money in the account, because among other things, they do take that into consideration. A bank that sees that you've had stability in how much money you've kept in their accounts, especially if it's what they call sticky money, so savings accounts or investment accounts, which usually tend to stay at the bank, those are also considerations in giving you a mortgage, because they know that they have visibility as to what goes in, what goes out, and they have a history about your flows, your cash flows. So that can also be a positive in deciding on your mortgage. So hopefully that answers your question.
We have a question here. I'm not going to read these word for word. How do you pay off debt when you're not in a good place financially? Basically, you have to make a list and know what your income is, and what you need to spend money on, like rent, electricity. I've seen people set up budgets and forget just minor things like food, just minor stuff. Okay. And then see if you have enough money to pay it off bit by bit. If you don't, then that's where you need to sit down with the people who you owe money to and see what you can work out. If you can't, and there's no way you could pay it off, then that is a time you speak to an attorney by bankruptcy. If there is a way to pay it off, and if they won't work with you, they won't. But the bottom line is, if they won't work with you, they always face the possibility that they may never collect anything. It's not good for them either. So try to work with them. It's your best bet at this point. Deborah, I'm just going on to the next one, unless you have something to say. Someone has credit cards that are paid off, like to cancel them, but afraid that it'll affect their credit scores. They have other cards with balances. There is no way that should affect your credit score. And if you're concerned about it, I would send a letter to the credit bureau saying that you have a 0 balance and you decided to close this account. That way it's on record. If it's 25 words or less, they have to include that record when reporting for your credit with your credit report. So if you're nervous about that, put that in.
Yeah.
Can't hurt. Somebody was saying thank you and came up with a really long question that I haven't even read yet. But but I'll read the part of it to you. The credit was in good shape until recently, and they had unexpected challenges. Changed job, lower salary, partner fell ill, a lot of stuff. Okay. You explored the possibility of a loan for debt consolidation. Yeah, the interest rates are higher now, and there's not a darn thing you can do about it. Okay, let's see. Contemplating returning your car. Okay, you know what? It gets down to a point where this person is considering returning their car because they can't afford it. It might be a possibility. Also, I don't know how much you're paying for your car. I've seen people pay $1,200, $1,500, $2,000 a month for a car, and I've seen people pay $150 for a used car. If it's possible you can do something like that, great. The bottom line here is the same as we've been discussing. If it's something you can't do, you can't. If you cannot pay it off, you can't pay it off. I do not like to recommend bankruptcy under any conditions. I don't, but if you eliminate everything else, including speaking to the people who you owe money to, from what you're saying here, you had a very good credit rating and they know you were paying it. Tell them what's going on. It's not a secret to them. They know, but you have to come to them and speak to them and work something out if possible. Deborah, you have any other insights on that?
No, I mean, I would say on the car, if you have a lease, you also have to be aware that sometimes it's not an option to break the lease without penalty. So sometimes the cure is worse than the illness, right? Because usually they tighten it up much. So that's something to consider. But if you're toward the end of the lease, maybe, there's a way to negotiate. The other thing too is that, and again, it depends, on how much you want to extract. But at least you can reduce your lease payments if you have a typical case, right? You have a car dealership, brand X that has a high-end car that maybe you were leasing. And so maybe you can, if you go and move it into a new lease, so let's say you're coming toward the end of your lease, you're about 3 months before the end of the lease, the car dealership will be eager to flip you into another car. But that doesn't need to mean that you go into a more expensive lease. So one way to reduce your monthly lease payment, work with the dealership, get yourself out of your current lease of the more expensive one into a cheaper one. And if you're working with the same dealership, many times they'll waive the lease fee break if you do it with them. Because typically they won't. They'll charge you usually the cost of the remainder of the lease if you break it beforehand. Somebody asked a very good question, interesting question. Well, all the questions have been really good. There's a question on what are your thoughts on borrowing against the 401k to pay off and eliminate credit card auto loan debt? So 401k, you can borrow against it, but you have to treat it as if it was another bank. 401k should be repaid with the same diligence as if you're borrowing from another bank. Otherwise, you'll be subject to penalties. People do it, but be careful. This is, you're eating into your retirement. Penalties can apply. You have to take a look at your program and what you're allowed to do. People have done it effectively to pay off short-term immediate debt and then pay back their 401k with a longer time period because that's what they're able to do. So it's not a bad idea as long as you understand the penalty structure for your 401k, the maximums that you can do without penalty, and treat it again as if it were the bank. Even though you're the bank, treat it as if it was another bank. Don't slack on paying it because there are penalties, and at the end of the day, you're taking money out of your own retirement fund.
Deborah, I've seen something here that I've never encountered. Someone said they have a credit card with a revolving balance, and the balance was increased because of their credit score went down.
The minimum?
I'm not sure exactly. You just said the balance was increased. The payments were on auto pay. And
The-
because the credit score decreased, they increased their revolving balance.
It could be that what they did is they increased the monthly minimum because their credit card score went down. So your minimum payment on a credit card is also linked to your credit card score. So that's what could have happened, or they could have increased your interest rate. Because if you were behind payments, they'll charge a penalty rate. So there's a default rate, so to speak. So they'll
Well, no,
charge
they were on auto pay, so they couldn't have missed a payment.
Okay, so if they
So-
did miss a payment, it could have been then that they increased the rate just for additional risk, or they increased the minimum balance, which now gets capitalized if you're not paying off your full balance.
I would actually personally, if you have any bank account anywhere, find a way to pay it off with a lower interest rate and
Yeah.
pay a lower interest rate. Because what you're telling me here, what you're asking here to me should be criminal. If they increase your payment amount, that's one thing. But if they increase your balance, which is what the lady is saying, if they increase the balance, could we check that out, that the balance could be increased?
Well, I'm thinking the balance could have been increased if the minimum increased and the person didn't. So let's say if your minimum went from $40 to $80 and you
Right.
are just paying minimum, that $80 is now tacked on and capitalized because it has a higher interest. You're getting charged on a higher balance with a higher interest. I'm thinking that could be the only thing. But
Yeah.
yes, you need to ask, at the end of the day, anything that seems unusual, don't assume they're right. Right? Don't assume the bank's got it right. Ken was giving multiple examples of things that weren't right. And it's okay. And in fact, somebody asked here, how do I go about a bill going into collection? Does that affect my credit score? Should I dispute it? So the answer is yes, it does affect your credit score. And and the question, should I dispute it? If you think it is incorrect, they billed you inappropriately for services that were not rendered, or you already paid it and you can demonstrate it was paid. Whatever the case may be, yes, you certainly should. That's what I was saying earlier.
Yeah, in
It's
this case,
better-
but what I'm
Good.
asking, I'm curious about, she said she asked them what happened. They said they sent her a letter, and she never got it. Now,
Okay.
I tend to think there's a little bit of problem here that they're not, let's just say they're not dealing as fairly as they should. What would you suggest, and who would you suggest they contact on this?
You call. Forget about the letters. You call and you become a pain in the neck until you get the right answer. I mean, look, sometimes sadly, the system counts on people not wanting to have what we call the pain in the neck premium, meaning, sometimes people pay things or just go about and assume it's right because they don't want to have to be burdened. But if you think something's wrong, you have to pursue it and count on the fact that it's going to not be easy. You're going to have to get on the phone. You're going to be on hold. You're going to probably have to follow up, but be persistent. If the letters aren't getting you anywhere, or they seem like, dear, Joe letters, or dear Jane letters, just call up. Just stay on the line until you get a representative.
There is something I've done, and my friends, my wife and my daughters always amazed how this works a lot. I find out where the main office is, find out who the CEO is or the president. They get a letter. Sometimes I send it certified with a return receipt. Sometimes I don't. It's a question of how I feel. And I explain to them what happened. And I explain to them that basically I feel that they haven't been fair. I don't threaten them. I just tell them I will contact, everyone I know, talk about this. I will ask my elected officials about this. I will even put it on the internet as a warning not to work with your company. Or I would just like to get this handled properly. And you have to tell them what you would like to do, and you have to be reasonable. If you ask them just to waive everything, they're not going to do that. If you say, look, I'd like it restored to what it was, I'd like to take away any late payments or any extra interest, they can do that. It's a question of is it worthwhile for them to do something you want or just ignore you? I find that threatening people with just telling the truth on the internet and speaking to different politicians, and newspapers. Now, you don't have to agree with this, Deborah, but you know what? Amazingly, it works a lot of the time because so few people do it. But you have to do research and find out their main office and find out who their CEO is. Sometimes you could all do this by email. It depends.
Hmm.
And we're never going to get to all the questions. So if we could stay here till midnight if you'd like, you know what I mean? But I don't think we're allowed.
Yeah, there is another question, and I think I'd like to address it, that came through the chat. It says, if you pay, and I'll address it in a second, because it's a good question, right? If you pay and cancel several of your credit cards, wouldn't you lose your good credit? Won't your credit score drop? So there's a difference between, it's a very pertinent question, right? There's a difference between building your credit score when you don't have one. And so you get a credit card, maybe get 2 credit cards, you pay on time, you have a balance, you pay again and again. That builds your credit score. Having 15 credit cards outstanding without credit history, meaning you're not demonstrating that you're using it and paying it down, and they just linger, believe me, that is detrimental. You're better off having a few, 2, maybe 3 credit cards that you use regularly, that you pay down on time. Hopefully you pay in full on time. That is a boost to your credit card. Having 15 and being late on one and not having any balances, on the others will not be helpful.
I have one quick question here. Your bill is going to collection. Does it affect my credit card? Should I dispute it? If the bill is wrong, you definitely should dispute it, period. You can, and it will, everything affects your credit score, good, bad, whatever. However, if you have a valid reason for it, I would send a letter to the 3 credit bureaus that is less than 25 words explaining why it is not valid, and they will have to read it. They have to include that when someone looks at your credit. Deborah?
Yeah, no, I have nothing to add to that. No,
Yeah.
Nothing to add. But yeah, I mean, look, education is important. You should be educated on what your rights are. You should be educated on the facts and use them in your favor. I mean, that is the best policy. You have to persevere, because in the age of bots and automatic, answering machines, and, dial 7, then dial 4, and then you just get into that stuck in that vortex of automation. It's going to be trying on your patience. But at the end of the day, if you believe you're right and you have facts, you shouldn't desist. And that's the bottom line. You do have rights as a consumer. And it's important that you know them and use them appropriately. So
it's also understand that these companies are counting on your not being persistent. They're hoping that you're just going to say, well, I can't do this, I can't do that. They're not built to handle people who are persistent, people who won't give up. Provided you're right. If you're wrong, you're wrong. I mean, there's a difference here. But the idea is you keep going after them. They're not used to it. For the 2 or 3 people out of 100 that say anything, there are 98 people who just go along with it and just let it go. Don't be one of the 98. Be a pain in the neck. I don't want to use other parts of the anatomy to tell me it's wrong. Okay, but just be a pain in the neck about it.
yeah. Look, I think we're close to the hour. I don't know if there's anything that, Alexa, you want to say, or anything else, Ken, that you wanted to comment. Obviously, such really good questions. We hope we answered most of them, or at least the themes. We encourage anybody who has still questions to send them over, I guess, through Mercy. And we really look forward to doing this again. Maybe we'll get invited back.
Yeah, I'm sorry if we couldn't get to every question. Please understand, everything affects your credit, good or bad. And sometimes we can't tell how it'll work. But if it's something that's negative on your credit report, you can challenge it if it's not correct. Because to get the credit companies to change anything is a nightmare. But putting something in is worth it. if you have a good relationship with a bank, and it's a big bank especially, they can sometimes run interference with you with a credit bureau who won't listen. Because I had that with Citibank. When I had that problem with someone stealing my identity, TRW would not listen, would not do a damn thing. I called Citibank because I had a credit line, just to let them, and got to the security department to let them know what was going on in case they got something wrong. And the guy was very nice about it. He says, is there any other problem? I told him what happened with TRW. 3 minutes later, we're on the phone with TRW with making sure it was corrected, everything is okay.
Very good.
And he told in front of the person at TRW, said, here's my phone number. If TRW is any problem, you call me and let me know.
That's wonderful.
That's because it was Citibank and I had the right guy in security and I saved him a lot of problems. I didn't expect that to happen. But again, you never know what could happen if you're persistent. Thanks, Deborah.
No, thank you. Thank you, Ken. And thank you all who attended today. It was wonderful. And thank you for our sponsors.